Thank you all for having me back. I hope I don't disappoint and live up to last year's expectations, and also to you. That was really rather unfair. How many of you here are struggling? Who's struggling? Like, who's struggling to keep going? Who feels as if, there's too much pressure? I can't do it anymore. It's coming at me from all different sides. I mean, I know I do. We need to recognize that that emotion being generated within us is a weapon in the arsenal of those who do not want us to keep reporting. Now, what you saw there is a clip from my time in Gaza. I went there 4 times in 2024. I didn't go as a journalist. Obviously, journalists are denied entry from Gaza. I had left CNN in 2022. And I went in with my charity, INARA, and after 4 trips come to 2025, I was denied entry to Gaza. And those trips in Gaza, especially the last time that I was there, which was November and December of 2024, I mean, each time you go back, you think it can't get crazier, you think it can't get worse, and then it does. And on that particular trip, we were begging the Israelis to let soap into Gaza because there was so much disease that was being spread in the camps, and hygiene packages were not being permitted entry, and we couldn't. We were begging for flour because children were getting crushed to death at bread lines because there wasn't enough flour there. We were begging for more tents and shelter items because people were under these repeated displacement orders and being pushed from, one area to the next, and we couldn't do anything about it. And at one point in time, I found myself on the bathroom floor in the guest house I was staying in, and I was sobbing. The thing is I was sobbing because I wasn't able to save baby mice. Now, before you judge me on that, let me explain the story. So I stayed with this other organization in this one guest house, and we had also come under displacement. So we moved into this new house, and one of my closest friends, this young woman from Gaza, has this really nasty, annoying cat named Caramella. And in this new house, Caramella had just killed a mouse. And so I get pulled over because they all know I'm an animal lover, and they're like, we don't know what to do. And these baby mice, her babies, are falling out of a couch. And there's a guy I know who runs a vet clinic. So I'm like, okay, if I can keep these baby mice alive, I'm going to take them to the clinic. So I wake up every 3 hours to sort of drip sugar water into these baby mice's mouth. And then I have a little Q-tip and I'm rubbing their little bellies because that's what it said you have to do online. And then I give them over to my vet friend. And obviously by the evening, he comes back and he tells me the mice were dead. And that cracked me. But fundamentally, it wasn't really about the mice, right? It was about this need to just be able to do something, to just be able to save something. So where do we keep on getting that power when we feel like we're drowning to be able to keep treading water so that we don't drown? Because the stronger we are, the more threatened they are. And the stronger we are and the better we're able to protect ourselves, the more capable we are of fighting against all of these external factors. But also, let's not forget the factors that exist within us. Let's not forget the pressure that we put on ourselves and that sometimes even well-meaning people around us put on us. It is very heavy to be out there and witness all of these things. And I'm sure a lot of you are constantly asked, like I am, oh, how do you keep going? Isn't it hard? Why do you keep doing this? And we all have to figure out how to answer those questions for ourselves. I remember very clearly the first time that I heard pain. And it was in Iraq, and it was Samara 2004. And the US military was going on this offensive, and I was embedded with them. I was still very young, super junior in the industry. And so they'd gone through the whole operation and the usual, gunfire and this and that and drama and whatever. And then at one point when the battle ended, we were driving to the morgue. And I was in a Humvee, and the thick plated glass, and it's all very dusty and you can barely see through it. It's like looking through a hazy screen. And I remember this woman who was stumbling along the road, and it was all sandy, and her steps were kicking up sand, but her movements were so thick, it was as if she didn't want to get to where she was going. And then at one point, she sort of stumbles, and her black abaya falls off, and this chestnut hair comes tumbling out, and she's just wailing, "Why?" And it was a sound I didn't even know a human being could emit. The cameras weren't rolling. There was no way to put this into the report. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could just drop people into this moment, they would understand. And my whole career has been defined by trying to tell stories in such a way that they are so deeply human, so deeply raw, that they will drop people into that moment. It literally defined my career. And I have failed at doing that. And I carry this belief with me that I have failed. And this is where my own personal pressure really comes from. Because surely if I had succeeded in telling all of these human stories from Iraq or Syria or Egypt or Libya or Afghanistan or, Gaza or anywhere, then things would change. Because what happens to us when the fundamental belief behind which our desire to want to do journalism is taken away from us, when we feel like we're losing, when we feel like no matter what happens, we're not going to win? How do you keep going in that atmosphere? And I had to ask myself that too, repeatedly. And I'm sure like many of you, my initial coping mechanisms were not really all that great, right? I was like the total cliche. Bottle of whiskey at night, 2 packs of Marlboro Reds, angry at the world, wanting to punch my fist through a wall. And I got to a point where I was in a very, very dark place that I compare to feeling as if I was holding on to the edge of an abyss by my fingernails, but my fingernails were ripping out and I was sliding. And I actually hate it when people talk about go and get help and working on yourself, but that is exactly what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to frame it a bit differently, because I ended up across from a traditional therapist. And I'm telling her this whole crazy story at that specific point in time. It's, I think, 2014, and, ISIS is on a rampage everywhere. A bunch of my friends had been kidnapped. Everyone had been beheaded except for one young man who was kind of like my younger brother. So I'm telling her this whole story, and I'm talking to her about how, I'm struggling to process emotion because everything just gets stuck in my throat and I can't let it out. And it's like an elephant is sitting on my chest. And I look up and she's crying. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm crying for you." And I was like, "Nope, sorry, I'm out." And I left. What did work for me, though, was something called EMDR, right? Which, in a nutshell, it's like electromagnetic something. But in a nutshell, and again, not everything doesn't work for everybody, but EMDR basically is built on this concept that your brain does go through significant trauma when it witnesses or experiences or reads about or watches traumatic events, and go through enough of those traumas, and the left side of your brain and the right side of your brain stop communicating properly. You can quite literally break your brain. And what EMDR does is it helps realign it. And I actually was quite reluctant to sort of go deeper into this, because I was terrified that if I'm not angry anymore, I'm going to lose my fire. And if I lose my fire, I'm going to lose my fight. And I didn't actually want to change the way I felt, because I thought that that was where my fight came from. And what I realized was that the way that I was personally processing everything was actually poisoning me and preventing me from being able to fully do my job. And again, when we talk about working on ourselves, there's no magic solution to it. There's no nothing. This is literally my story and what actually ended up working for me. And everyone is going to have a different story and a different relationship with this. But what I began to realize slowly was that as I started recognizing why I was reacting to certain things in a certain way, and which emotions were being sort of misplaced and misdirected, i.e., I'm crying because of the mice, but what am I really crying about? the greater that understanding became, the more able I was to recognize it before it was going to hit me. And what that meant was that I was actually making myself stronger. I was more able to fortify myself against all of these different external pressures because they come from everywhere. You know, our family also puts pressure on us. Look, my mom is Syrian, right? And I don't know if any of you have any Arab friends, but like, do not mess with a Syrian mom. And my Syrian grandfather was assassinated, actually, when my mom was 3 years old. And it's a long story on its own, but suffice to say that I love her, Syrian mother would send me text messages when I'm in the middle of a war zone, especially when I was in Syria, that would read, Arwa, Syria took my father. I don't want Syria to take my daughter. I know. And it works, right? It crushes you. And so you have all of these things that are coming at you and crushing you from so many different directions. And then there's also the idea that if you're able to get through all of it and then you're able to do the report and you put the report out there into the world, something is going to change. And then it doesn't. And that is also a crushing blow. And that has been one of my biggest crushing blows. As I was saying earlier, you know, I fundamentally used to believe very naively that if people know what's happening, if they can really understand the human emotional toll, something is going to change. And, you know, that's what journalism is all about. We're supposed to be changing the world for the better, and then it doesn't happen, and how do you keep going? I ended up having to change my framework because despite everything that I'm saying, I still 100% and more believe in what we do and why we do it. But the way that I changed my framework was, to a certain degree, sort of within myself, diminishing the expectation. Because also, let's accept it. You know, Arwa Damon's not going to change the world, and it's like an insane amount of pressure to put on anybody, and like I was being ridiculous. But at the same time, why did I keep going? And a colleague said to me, this is when Syria was still happening, you know, why do you keep going to Syria? You're not going to win any awards off of that coverage. Nobody cares. And I was like, I said a bunch of nasty things about her in my head. But irrespective of that, it did make me say, like, why am I going back? And it's the same story, you know, or a similar story over and over again. And I realized that I was going back because I believed that they don't get to win. They don't get to drive us into apathy. Yes, they can drive the viewers into apathy by creating these enormous problems and conditions and situations that people just don't want to watch it anymore. And, you know, I have a certain measure of understanding for that, but they are not going to drive me into apathy. And the other reason also, and this was very personal, is I don't believe that the victors get to be the only ones to tell the story. Even if the story doesn't change history has to have that record in it. And I want to leave you with one last thought too, because this was quite big for me, although some people do find it quite depressing. I know. I'm really bad bar conversation, by the way. But in terms of like getting your power, so I'm always asked like, oh, what gives you hope? And like, I hate that question. But obviously then you get asked it over and over again and you start thinking about it. And so a few years ago, I was contemplating this because I was like, I don't have hope. Like, so what is going on? And then I realized I don't have hope, but I'm still going to all these places and I'm still, you know, doing what I do. And I'm now in this like kind of, you know, dual parallel universe where it's journalist and humanitarian, and I story tell through the humanitarian space, and I, you know, overlap all of it. But I'm still out there all the time. Why? If I don't have hope, am I doing this? And then I realized I don't need hope. And in that realization of I don't need hope to keep doing what I'm doing because I fundamentally believe in it, in its essence, I got all of my power back. I got all of my strength back because all of a sudden it became, do you know what? Give me hopeless. Give me the biggest hopeless you can quite possibly come up with, and I'm still gonna fight because do you know what? I don't need hope. Thank you very much.